windshield wipers struggled against the downpour as Mark Harmon drove along Highway 50 in rural Nevada. It was just past midnight on October 2nd, 2012, and he was eager to reach the next town after 18 hours on the road. A geology graduate student at the University of Colorado, Mark was returning from a research trip, his trunk filled with rock samples and field equipment. The rain had started unexpectedly an hour earlier, transforming the already desolate highway into a glistening black ribbon that seemed to vanish into nothingness beyond his headlights. The local radio station had long since dissolved into static, and his phone showed no service bars. Mark wasn't concerned. He'd driven this route before and knew that Carson City was about 90 minutes away. He passed a weathered sign indicating he was entering what locals called the Silent Stretch, a 50-mile segment of highway notorious for its lack of services, homes, or cellular coverage. Mark had barely registered the sign when his headlights illuminated something in the road ahead, a figure standing motionless in his lane, facing away from him. Mark slammed on his brakes, causing his sedan to hydroplane. Fighting the wheel, he managed to stop just yards from what he now saw was a woman in a dark raincoat, completely still despite the approaching vehicle. Her long hair, plastered against her back by the rain, didn't move in the wind. "Hello?" Mark called through his partially lowered window. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman didn't respond or turn around. Mark's instinct was to help. He was raised in a small town where you didn't leave someone stranded, but something felt wrong. Why was she standing in the middle of the highway, in the rain, at midnight, miles from anywhere? "I can drive you to the next town," he offered, heart pounding. Still no response. Mark hesitated, then made a decision that would haunt him for years. Instead of getting out, he carefully maneuvered around the figure, watching in his rearview mirror as she remained motionless in the rain. As the distance between them grew, he felt equal measures of relief and guilt. 5 miles later, Mark spotted flashing lights ahead. 2 police cruisers were parked across the highway, creating a roadblock. A soaked officer approached as Mark rolled down his window. "Evening, sir. We're stopping all vehicles in the area. Have you seen anyone on the road tonight, particularly a woman, possibly in dark clothing?" Mark's mouth went dry. Actually, yes. About 5 miles back, there was a woman standing in the middle of the lane. I tried talking to her, but she didn't respond. I drove around her. The officer's expression darkened. "Sir, I need you to turn around and follow me back to that location, right now." The drive back was tense. The officer explained they were searching for Janet Paulson, a local woman who had disappeared 3 days earlier after her car broke down on this stretch. Her husband had reported her missing when she failed to return from visiting her sister in Reno. "The thing is," the officer added, glancing at Mark, "we've had at least 7 reports tonight of a woman standing in the road at different points along this highway. But every time we get there, there's no one. And no one could be moving that fast between locations on foot." When they reached the spot where Mark had seen the figure, there was nothing. Just empty road. The officers searched the surrounding area with flashlights, but found no trace of anyone. One officer photographed what appeared to be a single set of footprints leading from the asphalt into the desert scrub, but they disappeared after just a few yards. "We need you to come to the station to make a statement," the officer told Mark. "You're the only one who's actually stopped and tried to communicate with her." At the small sheriff's office in Austin, Nevada, Mark provided his statement to the lead detective. As he was finishing, another officer burst in. "We found Paulson's car," he announced. "It's about 20 miles east of where this gentleman saw the woman. It was hidden in a ravine. Looks like it went off the road 3 nights ago during that storm." What followed was even more disturbing. Janet Paulson's body was discovered in her vehicle, having died from injuries sustained in the crash. The coroner estimated she had been dead for approximately 3 days, meaning she had died before any of the reported sightings. But it was the forensic evidence that truly chilled Mark. The mud on Paulson's shoes and the hem of her dark raincoat matched the soil composition of the exact spot where Mark had seen the figure standing. And her clothes were still damp, despite having been in the dry ravine for days. The investigation that followed revealed something that locals had whispered about for decades, but that had never been officially documented. The silent stretch of Highway 50 had a pattern of similar incidents dating back to the 1970s. Travelers reporting figures on the road at night, always during or shortly after rainstorms, and always in locations near where accidents had recently occurred, but bodies hadn't yet been discovered. Mark was allowed to leave the next morning. Before departing, the detective handed him a file containing newspaper clippings of similar incidents. "Most people don't stop," the detective said quietly. "They drive around or through whatever they see. You stopped. You tried to help." "What was it I saw?" Mark asked. "I can't put this in an official report," the detective replied. "But the working theory is that sometimes, when someone dies suddenly and alone in remote places like this, something lingers. Not a ghost. I don't believe in that nonsense. But maybe a pattern, an impression in the environment. Like the final moments repeating, trying to be found." Mark left Nevada that day and never returned. He completed his graduate studies and took a teaching position in Vermont, as far from the desert highways of the American West as he could get. He stopped driving at night entirely. Years later, in 2017, Mark received an email from the detective who had interviewed him. Attached was a scientific paper published in the Journal of Atmospheric and Environmental Phenomena, discussing the unusual electromagnetic properties of certain stretches of Highway 50 during storms. The researchers had documented inexplicable energy patterns that could potentially affect human perception, creating visual phenomena similar to mirages, but far more complex. "Thought you might be interested," the detective's message read. "They're calling it a breakthrough in understanding environmental hallucinations. But you and I know it doesn't explain everything about that night." What makes this story particularly unsettling is that Highway 50 in Nevada is indeed known as the loneliest road in America, and there have been documented cases of drivers reporting unusual sightings along its more isolated stretches, particularly during adverse weather conditions. The Nevada Highway Patrol maintains a special case file for unexplained incidents along this route, many of which share striking similarities. While official explanations range from optical illusions caused by rain and headlights to fatigue-induced hallucinations, the pattern of reports, particularly those involving figures appearing at locations where accidents had occurred but not yet been discovered, remains without conclusive explanation. Researchers at the University of Nevada have conducted studies on the psychological effects of prolonged driving in isolated areas, finding that the human mind becomes exceptionally susceptible to suggestion and misinterpretation after hours of monotonous desert driving. Combined with the unique atmospheric conditions of the Great Basin Desert region, these psychological factors might explain some, but not all, of the reported phenomena. For Mark Harmon and others who have encountered something inexplicable on the lonely highways of Nevada, scientific explanations offer little comfort. His experience, documented in a 2014 research study on highway safety and driver psychology, serves as a reminder that there are still places where the line between the explained and unexplained remains disconcertingly thin, especially on a dark, rain-slicked road in the middle of nowhere, when you're all alone and something is standing in your path. Sarah Chen gripped her steering wheel tighter as the fog thickened around her Toyota Camry. It was 2:17 a.m. on March 6, 2019, and what should have been a 4-hour drive from Portland to Seattle had already stretched past 5. The I-5 corridor, normally busy even at odd hours, was unsettlingly empty as she crept along at 40 mph, her high beams only making the wall of fog glow brighter without improving visibility. Almost to Olympia, she muttered to herself, trying to stay alert. As an emergency room nurse, Sarah was accustomed to night shifts and odd hours, but this drive was testing her limits. She'd stayed in Portland an extra day to help her sister move, and now regretted her decision to drive back overnight rather than wait for morning. The radio offered little comfort, mostly static, punctuated by occasional clear bursts of late-night talk shows, discussing topics that seemed designed to make lonely drivers even more paranoid. She switched it off, preferring the sound of her tires on wet pavement to conspiracy theories about government surveillance. The fog had been patchy for most of her journey, but shortly after passing Centralia, it had become a persistent, thick blanket. Highway signs loomed suddenly out of the whiteness and disappeared just as quickly behind her. The reflective road markers were her lifeline, guiding her forward when the edge of the road threatened to disappear entirely. Sarah checked her GPS again, still 40 minutes to Olympia, where she planned to stop for coffee before the final stretch to Seattle. That's when she first noticed the headlights behind her, appearing suddenly as if materializing from the fog itself. They stayed a consistent distance back, not close enough to be threatening, but persistent, matching her every lane change and speed adjustment. Probably just someone else who needs to follow a set of taillights, she reasoned, remembering her own gratitude when she'd had a pace car earlier in the journey. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The vehicle remained behind her, never advancing or falling back. Sarah couldn't make out what kind of vehicle it was, just a pair of headlights, slightly higher than her car, suggesting an SUV or truck. Something about the consistency of its presence made her increasingly uneasy. When she passed the exit for Tumwater, Sarah made a spontaneous decision to pull off at the next rest area. It wasn't her planned stop, but she needed to stretch her legs and, if she was honest with herself, see if the vehicle behind her would continue on its way. The blue sign for the Maytown rest area appeared, and Sarah signaled her exit. The headlights behind her signaled too. Her heart rate quickened as she pulled into the deserted rest area. This late at night, in the fog, what should have been a safe haven felt uncomfortably isolated. The only signs of life were the humming vending machines under the concrete shelter and a single semi-truck parked in the commercial vehicle section, its driver presumably asleep in the cab. Sarah pulled into a parking spot near the well-lit bathroom building. The vehicle that had been following her, now visible as a dark blue Ford F-150 pickup, parked 4 spaces away. No one emerged from the truck, but she could see the silhouette of a single driver behind the wheel. After 5 minutes of sitting with her doors locked, checking her phone, which showed no service, Sarah began to seriously worry. If she went into the bathroom, would the driver follow her? If she got back on the highway, would the truck continue its pursuit? She considered knocking on the semi's door for help, but was that overreacting? Just as she was weighing her options, her rearview mirror lit up with flashing lights. A Washington State Patrol car pulled in, parking directly behind the pickup truck. Sarah felt a wave of relief as a uniformed officer stepped out, flashlight in hand, and approached the truck. Through her side mirror, Sarah watched the officer speak briefly with the truck's driver. There was something in the patrol officer's stance, a stiffness, a readiness, that suggested this wasn't a routine stop. After a moment, the officer returned to his patrol car, driver's door still open, and appeared to be radioing something. Curiosity overcame caution, and Sarah lowered her window just enough to hear the sharp commands that suddenly broke the foggy stillness. Step out of the vehicle with your hands visible. What happened next unfolded with surreal speed. The truck's door opened, but instead of complying, the driver gunned the engine in reverse, crashing into the patrol car before speeding forward toward the highway exit. The officer scrambled back into his damaged vehicle and gave chase, sirens wailing as both vehicles disappeared into the fog. Sarah sat frozen, trying to process what she'd just witnessed. Her phone suddenly chimed with a notification. Service had returned, if only weakly. She immediately dialed 911. "I'm at the Maytown rest area on I-5 northbound," she told the dispatcher, her voice shakier than she expected. "I just witnessed what looked like someone fleeing from a state trooper." "Ma'am, we're aware of that situation," the dispatcher replied with a gravity that made Sarah's skin prickle. "Are you alone at the rest area now?" "Yes, except for a semi-truck. We're sending additional units to your location. Please stay in your locked vehicle until they arrive." "What's happening?" Sarah asked, fear congealing in her stomach. The dispatcher paused before answering. "I can't provide details of an active investigation, but there was an APB issued 2 hours ago for a suspect in a potential abduction case, driving a vehicle matching that description. The officer was conducting a welfare check based on your 2 vehicles traveling together for an extended period." Sarah's blood went cold. "I was alone. That truck just appeared behind me in the fog and stayed there for almost 30 miles. The next hour was a blur of police activity as 3 patrol cars arrived at the rest area." Sarah gave her statement multiple times, describing how long the truck had followed her and its behavior. By dawn, as the fog began to lift, she learned the full story. The truck's driver, identified as 34-year-old Marcus Wilton, had been pulled over 2 days earlier for a broken taillight in Eugene, Oregon. The officer had noticed something that concerned him: a collection of zip ties, duct tape, and women's clothing items visible in the truck, but lacked probable cause for a search. When Wilton's license plate was flagged in connection with a missing persons case in southern Oregon the following day, an alert went out to all agencies along the I-5 corridor. The state trooper who pulled into the rest area had recognized the truck from the APB. Wilton's subsequent flight ended 30 miles north when spike strips disabled his vehicle. The search of his truck revealed items belonging to 2 different missing women from Oregon, along with a disturbing collection of restraints, sedatives, and a detailed journal outlining plans for abduction. "Your decision to pull into a public rest area might have saved your life," the detective told Sarah as sunrise painted the sky pink through the dissipating fog. He'd been following women driving alone at night for months, according to his journal. Usually he'd back off if they stopped in populated areas. When Sarah finally arrived home in Seattle, nearly 12 hours after beginning her journey, news reports were already naming Wilton as the I-5 stalker, suspected in at least 3 disappearances along the interstate over the previous year. 2 months later, based on evidence found in his home and vehicle, search teams discovered the remains of 2 victims in remote wooded areas of Washington and Oregon. The fog-shrouded night on I-5 has remained with Sarah in ways she never expected. She testified at Wilton's trial in 2021, where he received multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. The Oregon State Police later revealed that Wilton had developed a method of using fog and late-night conditions to isolate potential victims, following them until they reached sufficiently remote areas where he could force them off the road or wait for them to stop from fatigue. Sarah no longer drives at night if she can avoid it. When friends ask why, she tells them about the headlights in her rearview mirror that emerged from the fog and followed her with unwavering precision. She tells them about the rest area that should have felt unsafe, but ultimately saved her. And she reminds them that sometimes the monster isn't supernatural. It's the seemingly normal pickup truck keeping pace behind you, waiting for its opportunity. The most unsettling aspect of the case came during the sentencing phase of Wilton's trial, when prosecutors revealed entries from his journal describing his methodology. Fog nights are hunting nights. They're already blind, already alone. They're grateful for guidance until it's too late to realize where they're being led. As a footnote to this true story, the Washington State Department of Transportation has since implemented enhanced security measures at rural rest areas, including improved lighting, emergency call boxes with direct lines to state patrol, and more frequent patrols during nighttime hours. Sarah Chen now volunteers with a victims advocacy group that works with law enforcement to develop safety protocols for isolated travel corridors, turning her terrifying experience into potentially life-saving education for others. But ask anyone who regularly drives the fog-prone stretches of I-5 between Portland and Seattle, and they'll tell you, when headlights appear in their rearview mirror on a foggy night and maintain the same distance mile after mile, they can't help but remember the case of the I-5 stalker and the nurse whose instincts saved her from becoming his next victim. The rain had been falling steadily for 3 days when Jason Miller decided to head home from his cousin's wedding in rural Pennsylvania. It was October 17, 2018, and what should have been a scenic 4-hour drive through the Appalachian foothills had turned into a tense journey as evening fell and water levels continued to rise. Local news had reported minor flooding on secondary roads, but the main highways were still passable. Barely. Jason, a 34-year-old software developer from Baltimore, had planned to stay another night at his cousin's place near Bloomsburg, but an urgent work crisis demanded his return. "It'll be fine," he assured his concerned relatives as he loaded his overnight bag into his Subaru Outback. "I've driven through worse." His cousin offered him the couch for another night, citing flash flood warnings, but Jason was confident in his all-wheel drive and familiarity with the route. By 7:30 p.m., he was second-guessing that confidence. The rain hammered his windshield with increasing fury, overwhelming his wipers even at their highest setting. Visibility had dropped to mere yards, forcing him to reduce his speed to a crawl. The GPS on his phone suggested a detour to avoid a reported washout on his planned route, guiding him onto increasingly narrow county roads. "Recalculating," the robotic voice announced for the third time as Jason missed another turn, unable to see the road signs until he was already past them. The blue line on his screen directed him onto Timber Creek Road, a winding stretch that cut through dense forest before reconnecting with the highway 10 miles south. The road narrowed further, the pavement roughening beneath his tires. His headlights reflected off sheets of water flowing across the asphalt in several places, but none seemed deep enough to be concerning. Yet, the trees pressed close on both sides, creating a claustrophobic tunnel that seemed to swallow the light from his high beams. At 8:17 p.m., Jason approached a small bridge spanning what his map labeled as Blackwood Creek. In normal conditions, it would be an unremarkable crossing over a modest stream. Tonight, it was a different story. The creek had swollen to fill its entire banks, the rushing water a churning brown mass that nearly reached the bottom of the bridge deck. Jason stopped, hazard lights blinking, and peered through the rain-streaked windshield. The bridge itself was an older concrete span, perhaps 30 feet long, with low guardrails that were barely visible above the water on the downstream side. Debris, branches, a plastic barrel, something that might have been part of a shed, bumped and twisted against the upstream side of the structure. Jason checked his phone again. The next alternate route would add nearly an hour to his journey. He studied the water level carefully, trying to gauge if it was still rising or had stabilized. After 5 minutes of observation, he decided the water wasn't getting any higher, and the bridge's concrete construction seemed solid enough. "Just take it slow," he muttered to himself, shifting back into drive and easing onto the bridge at walking speed. He was halfway across when he felt it, a subtle vibration through the steering wheel, a tremor so slight he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. But then came another, stronger this time, and unmistakable. Beneath his tires, the bridge was moving. Jason froze for a split second, caught between accelerating to safety or reversing back the way he'd come. In that moment of indecision, he heard a sound that cut through the drumming rain and the roar of the swollen creek, a deep, grinding crack from somewhere beneath the car. Instinct took over. Jason floored the accelerator, and the Subaru leapt forward, just as the concrete beneath its rear wheels gave way. The vehicle slammed onto the far bank at an angle, its back end dropping several inches as the bridge section behind it collapsed into the churning water with a thunderous splash. Heart pounding, Jason scrambled out of the car and staggered to higher ground, turning back just in time to watch in horror as the entire middle section of the bridge broke free and was swept downstream, tumbling over itself before disappearing around a bend in the creek. Had he hesitated for even 2 more seconds, his car, with him inside it, would have gone into the flood. With shaking hands, Jason called 911. The dispatcher took his information, but informed him it might be some time before anyone could reach him. "We've got multiple emergencies due to the flooding," she explained. "Are you in immediate danger?" Jason looked at the gap where the bridge had been, a 15-foot span of empty space with violent water rushing beneath it, and at the narrow road ahead that wound into absolute darkness. "No," he replied. "I'm safe for now, but I can't go forward or back. Stay in your vehicle, keep your hazards on, and we'll dispatch someone as soon as possible," the dispatcher advised. The next 3 hours were an exercise in growing dread. The rain continued unabated. Jason's phone battery dwindled to 20%, then 10%. He ran the car engine periodically for heat, but was mindful of conserving gas. The windows fogged from his breathing, creating an even greater sense of isolation. At 11:42 p.m., headlights appeared on the road ahead, sweeping through the trees as a vehicle approached from the other side of the creek. Jason flashed his lights in response, relief flooding through him. Help had arrived sooner than expected, but as the vehicle, a large pickup truck, came to a stop at the edge of the broken bridge, something felt wrong. There were no flashing lights, no official markings visible on its dark form. Just a powerful spotlight that suddenly blazed to life, blinding Jason through his windshield. He raised a hand to shield his eyes, squinting to make out any details. A figure emerged from the truck, illuminated from behind by the headlights. A tall, broad-shouldered silhouette, carrying something long and slender. A rifle. Ice formed in Jason's stomach. This wasn't emergency services. The figure raised what appeared to be a megaphone. "You need to come across." A male voice boomed, distorted by the device and the continuing rain. Jason cracked his window. "The bridge is out," he shouted back, though he knew it was obvious. "I know a way. Grab what you need and follow the light. You can't stay there." Every instinct told Jason to refuse, to wait for official help. But the water level was still rising, now lapping at the road, mere feet from where his car was parked. If the rest of the bridge went, or if the bank eroded further. "Who are you?" Jason called out. "Mitch Delaney, fire department volunteer. Off duty, but I live up the road. That section you're on isn't stable. Whole thing was due for replacement last year. Budget cuts." The man lowered the rifle, which Jason could now see was actually a long spotlight. There's a footpath about 50 yards downstream, an old maintenance access. It'll get you across. Jason weighed his options. His phone now showed just 4% battery and no signal bars. The call to 911 had apparently been one of the last areas of coverage before he'd reached this dead zone. The water was definitely still rising, and the man's explanation made sense. Rural volunteer firefighters often responded in their personal vehicles. "I'm coming." Jason grabbed his backpack, wallet, and phone, then locked his car and carefully picked his way downhill toward where the man's light now pointed. The footpath turned out to be an extremely narrow maintenance catwalk attached to an old pipeline that crossed the creek about 8 feet above the current water level. In normal conditions, crossing it would be nerve-wracking, but doable. In the dark, with rain making the metal slippery and floodwaters churning below, it was terrifying. "Take it slow," the man called as Jason carefully edged his way across, clutching a thin cable that served as a makeshift handrail. Halfway across, Jason made the mistake of looking down. The rush of water, the darkness, and the unsteady footing combined to create a moment of vertigo that nearly sent him plunging into the creek. He froze, knuckles white on the cable. "Keep moving," the man urged. "Look at me, not the water." Jason forced himself forward, one careful step at a time, until finally his feet touched solid ground on the far bank. His legs nearly buckled with relief. The man, Mitch, was indeed wearing a jacket with a volunteer fire department logo, though it was partially obscured by a heavy raincoat. Up close, he appeared to be in his 50s, with weathered features and watchful eyes. "Your timing is something else," Mitch remarked, leading Jason back to his truck. Another hour, and that whole crossing would have been gone. Inside the pickup's cab, Mitch cranked the heater and handed Jason a thermos of coffee that burned going down, but helped stop his shivering. As they drove slowly up the muddy road, Mitch explained that he'd been checking on elderly residents in the area when he got word of someone potentially stranded at Timber Creek Bridge. "That GPS of yours did you no favors," he said grimly. "Thing's supposed to be closed for commercial traffic. Has been for months. Weight restrictions. Signs must have been washed out." Jason hadn't seen any warning signs, but in the downpour, he might have missed them. "Thank you for coming to get me. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't shown up," Mitch grunted. "Not the first time. Won't be the last." They reached a small volunteer fire station, where Mitch had Jason fill out an incident report. 3 other stranded travelers were already there, waiting out the worst of the storm, a couple whose car had been swept off a low-water crossing, and a truck driver whose rig was stuck in mud up to its axles. It wasn't until morning, when the rain finally stopped and emergency services had restored some semblance of order, that Jason learned the full extent of the night's disasters. 7 bridges in the county had sustained significant damage or collapsed entirely. 3 people were confirmed dead, and 4 more were missing after trying to cross flooded roads. Most disturbing was what a state trooper told him as he was arranging for a ride to the nearest car rental location. "You're lucky you got off that bridge when you did. We just finished inspecting what's left of it with the county engineers. The whole structure was compromised, had been for years. Those temporary repairs they did last spring weren't holding. According to the engineers, even without the flood, that middle section was hanging by a thread." When Jason described the man who had helped him, the trooper looked confused. "We don't have a volunteer named Mitch Delaney in this district." A call to the fire chief confirmed it. There was no Mitch Delaney registered as a volunteer in the county. Yet the man had known exactly where to find Jason, had gotten him safely across the creek, and had brought him to a legitimate fire station before disappearing while Jason was giving his information to another volunteer. 3 days later, Jason returned to the site with a recovery crew to retrieve his car, which had miraculously remained on the small section of intact bridge. The creek had receded to normal levels, revealing the full extent of the destruction. Both approaches to the bridge were gone, leaving Jason's Subaru stranded on a concrete island. As the tow truck operator worked to rig a winch system, Jason wandered downstream to where he'd crossed on the pipeline catwalk. It took him nearly 20 minutes of searching before he had to accept what his eyes were telling him. There was no pipeline, no catwalk, no maintenance access of any kind crossing the creek anywhere in the vicinity. The local historical society later provided one potential explanation. In 1974, a similar flood had washed out the previous bridge at the same location. A local man named Mitchell Delaney, then a firefighter, had drowned while trying to rescue a family whose car had become stranded mid-crossing. The pipeline maintenance catwalk Jason described had been removed in the early 1990s when the pipeline was decommissioned. The official report listed Jason's rescue as self-evacuation prior to bridge failure. He didn't correct it. How could he explain that he'd been saved by a man who didn't exist, guided across a structure that wasn't there? What stays with Jason most isn't the collapsing bridge or the raging floodwaters, though those feature prominently in his occasional nightmares. It's the absolute certainty that had he not encountered Mitch Delaney, whoever or whatever he was, his name would have been added to the list of casualties from that terrible night. Jason no longer takes GPS directions without first checking a paper map. He no longer drives in heavy rain if he can avoid it. And he never, ever crosses a bridge during a flood warning, no matter how solid it appears. Because sometimes, the thing you trust to carry you safely across is already broken in ways you cannot see until it's almost too late. The Timber Creek Bridge has since been rebuilt with modern safety features and improved structural integrity. But locals now call it Delaney's Crossing, though few remember why. And on rainy nights, some claim to see headlights that approach the bridge from either side, pause, and then turn around, as if warned away by something only they can see. Melissa Carnes had been on the road for nearly 10 hours when she first noticed the construction signs. It was July 24, 2016, a stifling Sunday night, and the digital thermometer on her Honda Civic's dashboard still read 91 degrees despite the late hour. The air conditioning struggled against the oppressive heat of the Arizona desert, creating a constant background hum that had long since faded from her awareness. Road work ahead, detour next exit. She frowned, slowing from 75 to 65 mph. This stretch of Interstate 10 between Tucson and Phoenix wasn't on any of the construction alerts she'd checked before leaving El Paso that morning. Then again, emergency repairs happened, especially in regions where summer heat could buckle asphalt without warning. Melissa was a methodical traveler, a quality that served her well as a pharmaceutical sales rep covering the Southwest Territory. At 34, she'd logged enough road hours to fill several lifetimes, developing an instinctive wariness of unexpected route changes. But it was already 11:38 p.m. She was exhausted, and her hotel in Phoenix was still over an hour away. Another sign appeared. Mandatory detour. Exit 242. Follow posted route. Exit 242 was coming up in 2 miles, according to a small green sign. Melissa reached for her phone to check her map app, but the screen showed no service against a black background. Not unusual in remote stretches of Arizona desert, but frustrating timing. As she approached the exit, orange cones narrowed the interstate to a single lane, funneling all traffic toward the off-ramp. A portable electronic sign blinked. I-10, closed. Follow Route 87 north. Rejoin I-10 at exit 260. Melissa took the exit, noting with unease that she appeared to be the only vehicle in sight. No other headlights ahead or behind as far as she could see. The clock on her dashboard now read 11:47 p.m. Route 87 began as a well-maintained two-lane road cutting through flat desert terrain. By day, the landscape would feature the iconic saguaro cacti and distant mountain ranges that characterized this part of Arizona. By night, it was an unsettling void beyond her headlights. After 5 miles, the quality of the pavement deteriorated noticeably. The painted lines became sporadic, then nearly invisible. Another construction sign directed her to turn onto a smaller road, unmarked on her car's navigation system, which now showed her vehicle floating in an empty gray zone beyond the digital map's coverage. Melissa's unease deepened. She'd traveled this corridor between Tucson and Phoenix at least a dozen times in the past year and couldn't recall any secondary road like this one. But the detour signs continued, each one more weathered and difficult to spot than the last. At 12:18 a.m., she crested a small rise and her headlights swept across a sign so faded she nearly missed it. Pinal Junction, 3 miles. She didn't recognize the name, but felt a wave of relief at the prospect of reaching any kind of settlement. The road narrowed further and began to wind through low hills. Melissa's phone remained stubbornly without service, the clock now reading 12:26 a.m. She'd driven far enough that she should have been approaching the junction, but there were no lights visible ahead, no indication of any human presence at all. That's when her headlights caught the reflective eyes at the roadside. A coyote, she thought at first. But as she slowed, the shape resolved into a gaunt figure standing motionless at the edge of her high beam's reach. A person, not an animal, wearing what appeared to be tattered clothing, face indistinct in the darkness. Melissa's heart jumped into her throat. The figure didn't move as she approached, didn't attempt to flag her down or step into the road, just stood, watching her car pass. In her rearview mirror, she saw the shape pivot slowly to follow her progress until darkness swallowed it. The encounter left her badly rattled. Why would anyone be standing alongside this desolate road after midnight? She pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing her tired Honda to 65 mph, despite the uneven pavement. 2 more miles brought her to a dilapidated sign, Pinal Junction. A cluster of dark structures hunched against the starlit sky. A gas station with boarded windows, what might have been a small diner, and a few scattered buildings with the unmistakable look of long abandonment. This wasn't a junction. It was a ghost town. Melissa slowed to a crawl, her headlights illuminating crumbling facades and weed-choked concrete. The detour sign at the town's single intersection was so weathered she could barely make out the arrow pointing right, toward what her headlights revealed to be a dirt road cutting through open desert. She stopped completely, engine idling, heart pounding. Something was very wrong. Construction detours didn't route interstate traffic through abandoned towns and onto unmarked dirt roads. She tried her phone again. Still no service. As she deliberated, movement caught her eye. Another figure, emerging from between 2 derelict buildings. Then another, and a third, all converging slowly toward her car. In the harsh glare of her headlights, she could see their ragged clothing, gaunt faces, and the deliberate purpose in their approach. Melissa didn't wait to find out their intentions. She wrenched the wheel left, opposite the detour's direction, and accelerated hard down what appeared to be the town's main street. The sudden movement threw up dust that momentarily obscured her view, but not before she glimpsed more shapes emerging from the darkness, all turning toward her vehicle. The pavement ended abruptly, transitioning to rutted dirt that jolted her car violently. She kept her foot on the gas, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, as she bounced and skidded along what was barely a road at all. Her headlights swept wildly across scrub and cacti as the car fishtailed around a curve. After a mile of terrifying progress, her high beams suddenly illuminated a smooth strip of asphalt ahead, a proper road. She aimed for it desperately, her suspensions protesting as she bounced across a shallow ditch and onto blessed pavement. Only then did she see the familiar green reflective sign, I-10 West, 2 miles. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy. Somehow she'd found her way back to the interstate. She pulled over, hands shaking too badly to continue driving. The clock read 12:52 a.m. As her racing pulse began to slow, rational thought reasserted itself. What had just happened? Who were those people? And most importantly, why had she been directed off a major interstate into what was clearly an abandoned settlement? When she finally rejoined I-10 15 minutes later, the westbound lanes were open, with no sign of construction, detours, or closures. Traffic was light but present, other vehicles sharing the road with her for the first time in over an hour. Melissa reached her Phoenix hotel at 2:17 a.m., exhausted but too wired to sleep. The night clerk gave her a curious look as she asked if there had been any reports of interstate closures or detours east of the city. "No, ma'am," he replied. "Road's been clear all week." The following morning, Melissa contacted the Arizona Department of Transportation. The representative she spoke with was adamant. There had been no authorized detours on I-10 between Tucson and Phoenix on the night in question. When Melissa described the route she'd taken, the woman's tone changed from professional to concerned. "Ma'am, that sounds like the old Pinal Junction detour from about 4 years ago, when we had that major reconstruction project. But those signs should have been removed long ago, and nobody should be out there. That settlement was officially condemned in 2009 after the mine closure." Melissa filed a formal report, and 2 days later, received a disturbing phone call from an investigator with the Arizona Highway Patrol. "We checked out your report," the officer explained. "Found the remains of some old construction signs that had been moved from a storage yard and placed along that stretch of I-10. They've been removed now." "What about the people I saw?" Melissa asked. A pause. "We've had reports of a group living in those abandoned structures, mostly drifters, some with outstanding warrants. We've conducted sweeps before, but they always seem to come back. But why move construction signs? Why direct traffic there?" Another pause, longer this time. "There have been 3 missing persons reports in the past 18 months involving that stretch of I-10 at night. In each case, the individuals' phones last pinged near exit 242. Their vehicles were eventually located, but the drivers weren't. The investigation that followed revealed an elaborate trap. The group inhabiting the ghost town had been strategically placing stolen construction signs to divert isolated vehicles late at night. Most drivers, upon reaching Pinal Junction, would recognize something was wrong and attempt to turn around, at which point they would find the road blocked by vehicles hidden in the abandoned structures. What happened after that? Authorities could only speculate based on evidence recovered during the raid that finally cleared out the settlement. What they found in the collapsed mine shafts beyond the town suggested that Melissa's decision to flee rather than stop had saved her from becoming another statistic. 3 weeks after her ordeal, Melissa received a final call from the investigator. "Thought you'd want to know. We've identified 8 victims so far," he said, "and we found your license plate number written on a list in one of the buildings. They were watching the interstate from the hills, choosing targets. Solo drivers, out-of-state plates, late at night." "Why is this the first I've heard about any of this?" Melissa demanded. "Shouldn't there have been warnings?" There were limitations on what we could release during an active investigation, the officer replied. And frankly, the jurisdictional issues between state, local, and tribal lands complicated matters. But you should know, your report was what finally pushed this to priority status. You may have saved lives. Melissa changed jobs the following month, taking a position that didn't require lengthy road trips. She still drives occasionally, but never at night in unfamiliar territory. And she invested in a satellite phone that works even in the most remote areas. The most unsettling aspect of the case came to light during the trial of the 5 individuals eventually charged with the crimes. According to testimony, the group had been operating variations of the same scheme along desolate highways across the Southwest for nearly a decade, moving locations whenever police attention increased in a particular area. Their success relied on the same factors that had nearly trapped Melissa: isolated locations, strategic timing, and a critical understanding of human psychology. Most people follow official-looking detour signs without question. Most slow down when they see a person on a dark road. And most, when faced with the uncanny sight of an abandoned town, hesitate just long enough. The Arizona Department of Transportation now conducts regular sweeps for unauthorized road signs and includes warnings about unofficial detours in their highway safety materials. Special attention is paid to remote stretches of interstate during overnight hours, when traffic is light and drivers are most vulnerable. As for Pinal Junction, the state finally demolished the remaining structures in late 2017, removing the last traces of both the original mining community and the predators who had briefly reclaimed it. Today, nothing remains but concrete foundations slowly disappearing beneath the desert sand. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous things on a night drive aren't the road conditions or wildlife, but the darker aspects of human nature lurking just beyond the reach of your headlights. Melissa still has the detour sign that started it all, the one she passed on I-10 that night. Authorities let her keep it after the trial concluded. It sits in her garage as a reminder that not all threats announce themselves honestly, and that sometimes the correct path forward is the one that breaks all the rules you've been told to follow. David Chen checked his rearview mirror for the 5th time in as many minutes, confirming what he already knew. The orange glow on the horizon was growing brighter. Even at a distance of several miles, he could now make out individual flames licking at the night sky. The caldera fire, which had seemed safely contained when he left his sister's cabin that morning, had jumped containment lines in the late afternoon and was now racing through the drought-stricken forests of Northern California with terrifying speed. It was August 16, 2021, and David, a 41-year-old geology professor at UC Davis, had spent the weekend helping his sister Ellen winterize her remote vacation property before returning for the fall semester. The 3-hour drive home should have been routine. Instead, he found himself in a race against an inferno. Approximately 30,000 acres now burning, announced the emergency radio broadcast, cutting through the classical music station he'd been half listening to. Mandatory evacuation orders expanded to include all areas east of Highway 29 and north of Route 175. All residents must leave immediately. Do not delay to gather possessions. David gripped the steering wheel tighter. He was currently on Route 175, a narrow, winding 2-lane road that served as the main artery out of this sparsely populated region. Already the road was busier than he'd ever seen it. A steady stream of headlights headed westward, away from the advancing flames. His phone chirped with an emergency alert, then immediately lost signal. The screen displayed a fire evacuation warning with a map showing the rapidly expanding evacuation zone before the signal bars disappeared completely. Cell towers must be going down, he realized, a cold knot forming in his stomach. The traffic slowed, then stopped entirely. Through his open window, David could hear distant sirens and, more disturbingly, the faint roar of the approaching fire, a sound like continuous thunder that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The air, already thick with smoke, carried the sharp scent of burning pine. After 10 minutes without movement, drivers began emerging from their vehicles, standing on tiptoes and craning necks to see the cause of the delay. David followed suit, locking his Toyota and walking ahead along the line of cars. What he saw turned the knot in his stomach to ice. A quarter-mile ahead, Route 175 disappeared under a massive fallen oak, its ancient trunk spanning both lanes. A California Highway Patrol officer was directing traffic onto a Forest Service road, a narrow dirt track, barely wide enough for a single vehicle. "Road's completely blocked," the officer shouted over the growing wind when David reached him. "This fire access road will take you down to Junction Creek Road. Follow that west for 7 miles, and you'll hit Highway 29. Keep moving. Don't stop for anything." David jogged back to his car, mind racing. He knew these mountains well enough to recognize that the detour would add at least an hour to the journey, an hour they might not have, given how quickly the fire was moving. But there was no alternative. When his turn came, David steered onto the dirt road, wincing as branches scraped the sides of his car. The narrow track wound steeply downhill through dense forest, barely illuminated by his headlights. The procession of evacuating vehicles moved at a crawl, each driver navigating the unfamiliar terrain with extreme caution. 20 minutes into the detour, David's dashboard lit up with a warning. His engine was overheating. The steep grade and slow pace were taking a toll on the older vehicle. He cut the air conditioning, opened the windows despite the thickening smoke, and hoped the car would make it. That's when he noticed something odd. The line of taillights ahead of him had thinned dramatically. There should have been dozens of vehicles visible on the winding track below, but he could see only 3 or 4 sets of red lights. Where had everyone gone? The answer came a few minutes later, when he rounded a sharp bend and his headlights illuminated a crude wooden sign. "Fire break ahead. Alternate route," with an arrow pointing to an even narrower side track. The cars ahead must have taken this turn, though something about it struck David as strange. The sign didn't have the official Forest Service or CAL FIRE markings he would expect. Drawing on his knowledge of the area, David tried to mentally map where this side track might lead. If his orientation was correct, it headed east, toward the fire, not away from it. That made no sense as an evacuation route. He slowed, debating whether to follow the indicated turn or continue straight. The main forest road appeared clear ahead, though less recently traveled. As he hesitated, his rearview mirror filled with headlights. Another vehicle speeding down the hill, coming up fast behind him. David pulled slightly right to let it pass, expecting it to take the alternate route like the others. Instead, the vehicle, a battered pickup truck with spotlights mounted on the cab, screeched to a halt alongside him. The passenger window rolled down, revealing a bearded man in his 60s wearing a smoke-stained flannel shirt. "Don't take that turn," the man shouted, pointing at the wooden sign. "That track dead ends at an old logging camp. We just came from checking it. Folks are bottlenecked up there with nowhere to go. Fire's coming that way fast." The knot in David's stomach clenched tighter. But all those cars. Someone moved the official detour sign and put that one up instead, the man explained hurriedly. "We're trying to tell everyone we see. Highway Patrol has been notified, but they're stretched thin. Follow us. We know these roads." Without waiting for a response, the truck accelerated away. David hesitated only briefly before following, leaving the mysterious sidetrack behind. His scientific mind raced through possibilities. A mistake? Vandalism? Or something more sinister? The truck led him down the main forest road at a pace that seemed dangerously fast, given the conditions. But David kept up, trusting that local knowledge trumped caution in this situation. After another mile, they emerged onto a wider gravel road that the truck driver had identified as Junction Creek Road. David expected the truck to turn west toward Highway 29, as the highway patrol officer had instructed. Instead, it turned east, deeper into the foothills. He flashed his lights in confusion, but followed nonetheless. These people had just saved him from a potentially fatal wrong turn. He had to trust they knew what they were doing. 5 tense minutes later, the reason for the change in direction became clear. As they crested a rise, David could see Highway 29 in the distance below, and it was an inferno. The fire had jumped the highway, creating a wall of flames that no vehicle could possibly pass. Had he followed the original detour instructions, he would have driven directly into it. The truck pulled over at a wide spot in the road, and the bearded man approached David's car. "Highway's gone," he said grimly. "Fire moved faster than anyone predicted. We're heading to Mitchell Lake. There's a concrete boat ramp where we can wait it out if necessary." "What about all those people who took that sidetrack?" David asked. The man's expression darkened. "My son's a volunteer firefighter. He's leading a team up there now, trying to guide them back down before it's too late. That turnoff leads to Box Canyon. One way in, same way out. And the fire's moving that direction." "I don't understand," David said. "Who would put up a false detour sign? Why?" "That's what the sheriff wants to know," the man replied. "This isn't the first time it's happened during evacuations around here. We lost 3 people in the Copper Fire last year. Found their car on a logging spur that had been blocked by fallen trees. Someone had directed them that way with a fake sign, just like tonight. The implication was too disturbing to dwell on, that someone was deliberately directing evacuees into dead ends during active wildfires. For what purpose? Looting abandoned properties while emergency services were overwhelmed? Simple malice? Or something even darker? David followed the truck for another 40 minutes, along back roads he would never have found on his own, each turn taking them further from the advancing flames. Eventually, they reached Mitchell Lake, where dozens of vehicles were already gathered on the wide concrete boat launch. Emergency services had established a temporary evacuation center, with fire crews standing by to wet down the area if necessary. As David sat on the hood of his car, watching water-dropping helicopters work the fire line in the distance, a sheriff's deputy approached to take his statement about the false detour sign. He wasn't the only one reporting it. At least 30 other evacuees had been misled by similar, unauthorized signs placed at strategic junction points throughout the evacuation zone. "We're treating this as a criminal investigation," the deputy explained, her expression grave beneath her smoky face mask. "This isn't random vandalism. These signs were professionally made and strategically placed to create bottlenecks in areas that would soon be cut off by the fire. If people hadn't started warning each other." She left the sentence unfinished. David spent the night at the lake with hundreds of other evacuees, watching the distant ridgeline glow orange as the fire consumed everything in its path. By morning, firefighting crews had established a defensive perimeter around the lake, ensuring their safety even as thousands of acres burned. It was midday before he learned the full extent of what had happened. The sidetrack that he had nearly taken, the one indicated by the false sign, had indeed dead-ended at an abandoned logging camp. 37 vehicles carrying 53 people had followed it, becoming trapped when fallen trees mysteriously blocked their retreat. If not for the quick action of local firefighters, who knew an alternate route to reach them, all might have perished when the fire overtook the area shortly after midnight. More disturbing were the findings at the scene. The trees blocking the exit hadn't fallen naturally. They had been strategically cut to come down after a sufficient number of vehicles had passed. And hidden among the abandoned logging equipment, investigators found evidence of recent occupation: food wrappers, cigarette butts, and most tellingly, a cache of personal items taken from evacuated homes miles away. The emerging theory was as simple as it was horrifying. Someone was using the chaos of wildfire evacuations as cover for both looting and, it appeared, something far more sinister. By trapping evacuees in remote locations directly in the fire's path, they created scenarios where any deaths would be attributed to the disaster itself, rather than foul play. 3 weeks later, David received a call from the sheriff's department. They'd made an arrest, a former firefighter with extensive knowledge of the area who had been discharged years earlier for unstable behavior. A search of his remote property had uncovered items belonging to victims of previous fires, meticulously cataloged and stored. The full extent of his crimes was still being uncovered, but investigators believed he was responsible for at least 7 deaths previously attributed to various wildfires over the past 3 years. The man's journal, excerpts of which were released during his arraignment, revealed a disturbing obsession with creating perfect disappearances. Deaths that would never be investigated as homicides because they would appear to be natural consequences of disaster. David testified at the preliminary hearing, describing the false sign that had nearly led him into a trap. In the courtroom, he found himself unable to look directly at the defendant, a nondescript man in his 50s who, by all accounts, had once been a respected member of the very emergency services he later exploited. The case brought national attention to a previously unrecognized danger: the vulnerability of evacuation systems to malicious interference. In response, California Emergency Services implemented new protocols for evacuation routes, including digitally authenticated signage and real-time tracking of official detours. David still drives to his sister's cabin occasionally, but never during fire season. And he's installed a specialized GPS system in his car, one that works without cell service and contains detailed maps of every forest road and fire access route in the region. He's also become an advocate for evacuation safety, giving talks at community preparedness events about the importance of knowing multiple exit routes from remote areas. But despite these practical precautions, he can't shake the memory of that glowing orange horizon in his rearview mirror, or the chilling realization that the most dangerous thing on the road that night hadn't been the approaching wildfire, but the calculated malevolence of a human mind turning natural disaster into opportunity and a night drive into a potential death trap. The Caldera fire eventually burned over 120,000 acres, destroying 214 structures and claiming 4 lives, all from the fire itself, not from the sinister scheme that had been interrupted. But the case opened investigations into previous wildfire fatalities across the western states, some of which are still ongoing. Authorities now believe that at least 15 previously unexplained deaths during wildfire evacuations over the past decade may have been the result of similar criminal interference with evacuation routes. For residents of wildfire-prone regions, this case added a new dimension of horror to an already terrifying natural phenomenon. The knowledge that in the chaos of evacuation, not all dangers announce themselves with smoke and flame. Sometimes they appear as helpful signs along a dark road, pointing toward what seems like safety, but leads instead to a carefully constructed trap. Emma Wallace knew the exact moment when her ordinary commute turned into something else. It was 10:43 p.m. on Tuesday, November 12, 2019. She had just pulled out of the hospital parking garage after finishing her shift as an ER nurse at Northwestern Memorial in Chicago. The digital clock on her dashboard glowed in the darkness as she merged onto Lakeshore Drive, heading north toward her apartment in Rogers Park. The late autumn rain created hypnotic patterns on her windshield as wipers swept back and forth. Traffic was light, just the occasional cab and a few other night shift workers making their way home. Emma had made this drive hundreds of times over the past 3 years, often in worse conditions than tonight's drizzle. At the North Avenue exit, she first noticed the sedan behind her. Nothing remarkable about it. Some dark-colored four-door, maybe a Toyota or Honda, keeping a reasonable distance. Emma wouldn't have paid it any attention, except that when she changed lanes to let a speeding cab pass, the sedan changed lanes as well. Still, Chicago was full of northbound commuters. Coincidences happened. By the time she passed Fullerton, Emma had almost forgotten about the car until she glanced in her rearview mirror and realized it was still there, maintaining the same distance. When she slowed slightly, it slowed. When she accelerated to pass a delivery truck, it accelerated too. "You're being paranoid," she told herself aloud, voice steady in the quiet car. Working in the ER had made her hypervigilant, always anticipating the worst possible outcomes. Just last week, they'd treated a woman who'd been followed home and assaulted in her parking garage. The case had clearly gotten under Emma's skin. To test her theory, she signaled and took the Belmont exit, not her usual route, but it would still get her home, just through more residential streets. The car followed, maintaining the same 5-car distance behind her. Emma's pulse quickened. One coincidence was nothing. 2 was concerning. She took a random right turn onto a side street, then another left. Her follower matched each movement with precision. Now her hands were starting to tremble on the steering wheel. She was being followed, no question about it. Emma reached for her phone to call 911, but realized with a sinking feeling that it was nearly dead at 4% battery. She needed to be strategic. The rain intensified, reducing visibility and washing the streets into reflective black mirrors. Emma tried to remember the security protocols from the hospital's personal safety seminar. Don't drive home. Go to a police station or a well-lit public place with people around. At 10:54 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday, her options were limited. Most businesses would be closed or closing. The nearest police station was 15 blocks east, in the opposite direction from where she was now headed. Emma made a decision, turning toward the 24-hour Walgreens, where she sometimes picked up prescriptions. It was big, well lit, usually had security cameras in the parking lot, and most importantly, had people inside. As she navigated the increasingly residential streets, her follower maintained their distance, close enough to keep her in sight, far enough back to avoid seeming obviously threatening. At one intersection, illuminated briefly by a street lamp, Emma caught a glimpse of the driver. Just a silhouette, impossible to determine age or gender. She was 4 blocks from the Walgreens when her phone died completely. Emma felt a wave of isolation wash over her. Now she couldn't call for help, even if the situation escalated. The Walgreens appeared ahead, its bright fluorescent glow a beacon in the rainy darkness. Emma signaled, turned into the parking lot, and pulled into a space directly in front of the store's glass entrance. Through the windows, she could see a cashier and what looked like 2 customers inside. She watched her rearview mirror, heart pounding. The sedan slowed as it approached the entrance to the lot. For a moment, Emma thought it would continue past, that this had all been her imagination running wild. Instead, the car turned in and cruised slowly down the row of parking spaces, eventually coming to a stop 3 spaces away from Emma's car, positioned so that her driver's side door, was facing the front of their vehicle. If she got out, she would be fully illuminated by their headlights. Emma sat frozen, engine still running, doors locked, rain drumming on the roof. The other car's headlights remained on, making it impossible to see the driver. A minute passed. 2. Neither vehicle moved. Emma weighed her options. She could drive away, but the car would surely follow again. She could honk her horn to draw attention, but that might escalate the situation. Her best option seemed to be making a dash for the store, where there were witnesses and likely security cameras. She took a deep breath, gathered her purse and keys, and prepared to move quickly. That's when the other car's driver's door opened. A tall figure stepped out into the rain, definitely male, wearing a dark jacket with the hood pulled up. He stood for a moment beside his car, face obscured, then began walking directly toward Emma's vehicle. Pure adrenaline surged through her system. Emma jammed her key back into the ignition, threw the car into reverse, and accelerated backward, narrowly missing another parked car. She shifted to drive and sped toward the lot's exit, tires squealing slightly on the wet pavement. In her mirror, she saw the man run back to his car. By the time she turned back onto the street, his headlights were already pulling out of the lot behind her. Now the pretense was gone. This was no longer an ambiguous situation. She was being actively pursued. The sedan accelerated, closing the distance between them faster than before. Emma drove instinctively, taking random turns through residential neighborhoods she knew only vaguely, trying to work her way toward busier streets. The rain had become a downpour, reducing visibility and making the roads treacherous. Several times, her car hydroplaned slightly as she took corners too fast. She was driving north on Clark Street when she spotted Salvation, a Chicago Police Department patrol car, parked outside a 7-Eleven. Emma yanked the wheel, pulling alongside the cruiser and honking frantically. 2 officers emerged from the convenience store, coffee cups in hand, looking startled. Emma rolled down her window despite the rain. "Someone's following me," she gasped, pointing back toward the intersection. "Dark sedan, been behind me for 20 minutes. One officer approached her car, while his partner scanned the street, hand moving to his weapon. But the sedan was nowhere to be seen. It had either turned off or continued past when Emma stopped. "Ma'am, can you describe the vehicle and driver?" the first officer asked, already reaching for his radio. Emma gave what details she could. Dark 4-door sedan, male driver, average height, wearing a hooded jacket. It sounded pathetically vague, even to her own ears. The officers took her information and offered to escort her home or to the station to file a report. Exhausted and still shaken, Emma opted for the escort home, following the patrol car's reassuring flashing lights through the rain-slick streets to her apartment building. The officer waited until she was inside the security door before driving away. Emma took the elevator to her 3rd-floor apartment, double-checked every lock, and collapsed onto her couch, still in her damp clothes, too wired to sleep despite her exhaustion. The next morning, she called the police department to follow up. They had patrolled the area, but found no sign of the vehicle she'd described. Without a license plate number or better description, there wasn't much they could do except file a report and advise her to remain vigilant. Emma changed her route home for the next few nights, even stayed with a friend one evening. She installed a security app on her phone and made sure it was always fully charged. The hospital's security office arranged for escorts to her car after her shifts. Life gradually returned to a new, more cautious normal. 3 weeks later, Emma was working a particularly busy shift when paramedics wheeled in a car accident victim, a man in his 30s with serious but non-life-threatening injuries. As she helped transfer him from the gurney to the treatment bed, something about him seemed vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place why. It wasn't until she was checking his vitals that she noticed the car keys clutched in his hand, a Toyota key fob, identical to one she'd seen illuminated in headlights that rainy night in the Walgreens parking lot. Emma's hand froze on his wrist. The man's eyes fluttered open, meeting hers briefly before closing again. There was no recognition there, just pain and confusion from his injuries and the medications. She forced herself to continue the assessment professionally, noting his address from the driver's license the paramedics had provided, an apartment complex just 2 blocks from her own building. When the attending physician arrived, Emma quietly requested to be reassigned to another patient, citing a possible conflict of interest. She gave no further explanation, and in the busy ER, no one pressed for details. Later that shift, Emma used her break to speak with hospital security. The patient's name, Michael Lassiter, meant nothing to her. She had no connections to him that she could identify, no interactions she could remember. Yet he lived within blocks of her apartment and drove what appeared to be the same type of car that had followed her. The security officer took her concerns seriously, cross-referencing Lassiter's name with police databases. What they found sent a chill through Emma's body. Lassiter had been questioned in connection with 2 stalking cases in the past 5 years, though never charged due to insufficient evidence. Both cases involved healthcare workers, a pharmacy technician in 2014 and a medical assistant in 2017. By the time Emma's shift ended, Lassiter had been admitted for observation due to a concussion. Hospital security had flagged his file and ensured he would be assigned only male nurses for the duration of his stay. They also coordinated with Chicago PD to have an officer interview him about the incident with Emma. 2 days later, she received a call from Detective Alicia Mercer of the CPD Special Victims Unit. "We executed a search warrant on Mr. Lassiter's apartment and vehicle," Mercer explained, her voice professionally neutral. "I think you should come to the station when you're able." At the police station, Detective Mercer led Emma to a small conference room where several evidence bags were arranged on the table. "These were found in a locked drawer in Lassiter's bedroom," she said, pointing to the first bag. Inside were dozens of photographs, all of Emma, entering or leaving her apartment building, walking to her car in the hospital parking garage, shopping at the grocery store she frequented. The timestamps on the digital prints spanned the past 7 months. "We also found these," Mercer continued, indicating another evidence bag containing a small notebook. The pages displayed a meticulous log of Emma's comings and goings, work schedules, regular stops, even what appeared to be notes about her clothing preferences and daily habits. "How did he find me?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. "His sister was a patient in your ER about 8 months ago," Mercer explained. "Overdose case. According to what we've pieced together, he became fixated on you during her treatment, started researching you online, then escalated to physical surveillance." The final evidence bag contained a duplicate key to Emma's apartment building's front door and what appeared to be notes about her apartment's layout, including which unit was hers. "The night he followed you, we believe he was working up to approaching you directly for the first time," Mercer said. "When you evaded him at the Walgreens and then found the police, it disrupted his plan. Based on similar cases, these situations typically escalate when the subject believes they're losing control of the narrative." Lassiter was charged with stalking and attempted breaking and entering. The evidence from his apartment, combined with Emma's report of being followed, was enough to hold him while the investigation continued. Further forensic examination of his computer revealed extensive research on Emma, including attempts to access her medical records and financial information. During questioning, Lassiter finally revealed why he had targeted Emma specifically. His sister had not survived her overdose, despite the ER team's efforts. In his distorted thinking, He had convinced himself that Emma had somehow been negligent, or conversely, his story changed frequently, that she possessed extraordinary healing abilities she had withheld from his sister. Emma obtained a permanent restraining order and moved to a different apartment in another neighborhood. She transferred to the trauma unit at another hospital, changed her social media settings to maximum privacy, and took a comprehensive personal security course. The most disturbing aspect of the case came during Lassiter's trial, when prosecutors presented evidence that the accident that had brought him to Emma's ER had been no accident at all. Analysis of his vehicle's GPS system revealed he had been circling Emma's apartment building that night. Toxicology reports showed he had been under the influence of prescription sedatives. The theory emerged that he had intended to confront Emma at her home, but had crashed his car after taking medication to calm his nerves. As part of his guilty plea, Lassiter admitted that the night he followed Emma had been a test run to see how she would react to being pursued. He had planned to approach her at home the following weekend, plans that were only thwarted by his car accident and subsequent identification. 2 years later, Emma still varies her routes home and maintains stringent privacy practices. She volunteers with a support group for healthcare workers who have experienced stalking and harassment, a disturbingly common occurrence in her profession. What haunts her most isn't the photographs or the logs of her daily activities, disturbing as they were. It's the realization that for 7 months she had been watched without her knowledge, that ordinary moments of her life had been observed and recorded by someone whose interest in her had warped into something dangerous. And sometimes, driving home late on rainy nights, she still checks her rearview mirror more often than necessary, watching for headlights that maintain the same distance no matter how many turns she takes. Because the most terrifying truth she learned from her experience is this: by the time you notice you're being followed, the pursuit has usually been underway for much longer than you realize. The case was documented in a 2021 journal article on stalking behaviors targeting healthcare workers, though names and specific locations were changed to protect identities. It has since been incorporated into security training at several major hospital systems, where staff are now explicitly warned about maintaining privacy and recognizing early warning signs of problematic patient or family member fixations. Andrea Reeves adjusted her headset and stifled a yawn as she logged into her workstation. It was 11:50 p.m. on January 3rd, 2020, 10 minutes before her midnight to 8 shift began at the Rockland County 911 Dispatch Center in upstate New York. The night stretched before her, 12 hours of fielding emergency calls during what was typically the quietest shift. 6 years as a dispatcher had taught Andrea to appreciate the calm nights. Winter storms often meant car accidents, and summer brought drownings and hiking mishaps. But early January usually offered a respite, post-holiday, pre-spring, with most people tucked safely in their homes during the coldest hours. "Anything I should know about?" she asked Marcus, the dispatcher she was relieving. "Pretty standard Friday. Couple of fender benders from the ice this morning. Domestic on Pinecrest Drive. Usual Friday night drunk and disorderlies." He gestured to the monitor showing active patrol cars. "Thornton and Rivera are covering the north sector, Jensen's in the south. State police have 2 units on the interstate." Andrea nodded, settling in as Marcus gathered his things. The dispatch center was housed in the basement of the county administrative building, a windowless room bathed in the blue glow of monitors displaying maps, weather alerts, and active emergency services. Tonight, she was working alongside Tim Kellerman, handling fire and EMS calls, while she covered police dispatch. By 1:30 a.m., Andrea had fielded only 4 calls: 2 noise complaints, a suspected prowler that turned out to be a raccoon, and a request for a welfare check on an elderly resident whose medical alert had accidentally activated. She was updating the night's log when a call came through on the emergency line. 911, what's your emergency? Andrea answered, automatically noting the call's origin point on her map display. A cell tower covering a stretch of County Road 27, a rural two-lane that wound through the less populated western part of the county. The connection was poor, filled with static and wind noise. A woman's voice cut through, tight with fear. I need help. Someone's following me. I'm here to help, Andrea responded, voice steady from years of training. Can you tell me your name and location? Lisa Whitaker. I'm on County Road 27, heading east toward the interstate. The voice faded momentarily behind a wash of static. Been behind me for 20 minutes. Andrea typed the name into the system and pulled up the county map, pinpointing the caller's approximate location based on the cell tower. CR 27 was a notoriously dark stretch of road cutting through dense forest and farmland, with few houses and no businesses for nearly 15 miles. Lisa, I'm going to get help to you. Can you describe your vehicle? Silver Honda Civic, 2018. The woman's voice trembled. The car behind me is a dark pickup, lifted, with those extra bright headlights. They're right on my bumper, then backing off, then speeding up again. Andrea dispatched Deputy Jensen, who was closest to the area, but still about 10 minutes away. Is there anywhere safe you can pull over? A house or business with lights on? No, there's nothing out here. Just woods and... The call crackled with interference. Tried to pass me twice, but then slowed down instead. I'm doing 70 now, and they're still right. The line went silent. Lisa, are you there? Andrea kept her voice calm, despite the adrenaline now coursing through her system. The call reconnected, the woman's voice now a panicked whisper. I think I lost signal for a second. They just tried to force me off the road. Oh God, they're pulling alongside me. Andrea heard the sound of an engine roaring through the phone. Then a metallic impact. Lisa screamed. Lisa, what's happening? Andrea signaled to Tim, pointing urgently at her headset. He nodded, understanding immediately that the situation was escalating. They hit my car. Lisa's voice was breathless with terror. They're trying to run me off the... The connection dropped again. Andrea dispatched a second unit and notified the state police, providing the vehicle descriptions and last known location. Deputy Jensen's voice came over the radio, confirming he was 5 minutes from the area, lights and siren active. Andrea tried calling Lisa back, but the call went straight to voicemail. She kept the line open to the responding units, waiting tensely for any updates. 4 minutes later, Jensen's voice crackled through. Dispatch, I'm on CR 27 near mile marker 132. No sign of either vehicle yet. Continuing east. 2 more minutes passed. Andrea's stomach knotted as she imagined what might have happened in the silent gap. Dispatch, this is Jensen. I've got an abandoned vehicle on the shoulder near mile marker 135. Silver Honda Civic. Driver's side damage consistent with a collision. No occupant visible. Approaching now. Andrea directed state police to the location, while keeping the county's second unit searching the road ahead in case the pickup was still in the area. Dispatch Jensen again. The vehicle is empty. Driver's door open, personal items scattered. Signs of a struggle. I'm going to search the immediate area. The next hour unfolded with mechanical precision as additional units arrived, establishing a perimeter and beginning a systematic search. K-9 units were called in from a neighboring county. State police set up roadblocks. Andrea coordinated it all, still hoping that Lisa might call back. At 3:17 a.m., a state trooper radioed in from a roadblock on the interstate. Be advised, We've stopped a lifted black Ford F-250 with front-end damage. Single male occupant exhibiting suspicious behavior. 20 minutes later came the news that everyone at the dispatch center had been hoping for. Dispatch, this is Jensen. We've found her. Lisa Whitaker is alive. Repeat, alive. She ran into the woods when her vehicle was forced off the road. Minor injuries. Being transported to County General now. Andrea felt her shoulders sag with relief. This one would have a good ending at least. But the night's tension was far from over. As Andrea was logging the incident, a new call came in. Another woman, also on a rural road, also reporting a threatening vehicle following her. 911, what's your emergency? There's a pickup truck following me on Old Mill Road, a young woman's voice said, her words tumbling out in panic. High beams on, riding my bumper. I'm scared to pull over. Andrea's blood ran cold. Old Mill Road was 20 miles from where Lisa Whitaker had been attacked, and the truck that had been following her was now impounded at the state police barracks, its driver in custody. This was a different vehicle, a different predator. She dispatched the nearest available units while keeping the caller, identified as Megan Collins, 23, on the line. The parallels to the earlier call were uncanny, but this time, Andrea had no nearby units to send. The closest was 15 minutes away. Megan, I need you to stay on the line. Is there anywhere safe you can go? Any houses or businesses nearby? No, it's all countryside out here. I was coming back from my sister's in Albany. The woman's breath came in short gasps. The truck just flashed its brights again. It's been following me for almost 10 minutes. Andrea checked the map. There's a fire station about 6 miles ahead on your route. Can you make it there? I think so, Megan's voice cut off with a gasp. They're trying to pass me now. For the second time that night, Andrea heard the sound of an engine accelerating through her headset, followed by the sickening crunch of metal striking metal. Megan, what's happening? They hit me. They're trying to run me off the road. Andrea provided continuous updates to the responding units, but they were still too far away. All she could do was listen as Megan's situation deteriorated. They're pulling up beside me again, Megan reported, voice quivering. I can see. Oh my God. What is it? What can you see? It's not just one person in the truck. There are 2 of them. They're wearing masks. The realization hit Andrea with stunning force. The driver in custody from the first incident couldn't be responsible for this attack. Either he had accomplices or, far more disturbing, these were copycat attackers who had somehow learned of the first incident in real time. The county's radio channels were encrypted, but scanner apps could still pick up some emergency traffic. Had someone been listening, waiting for reports of a vulnerable driver on a remote road? Megan, listen to me carefully, Andrea said, her training taking over despite her growing horror. I need you to get to that fire station no matter what. Don't stop for anything else, even if they damage your car. Units are on their way, but you need to reach a safe location. They're coming up on my right again, Megan reported. I can't go any faster. Andrea heard another impact, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Megan screamed. They broke my window. They're trying to... There was a tumult of noise, screeching tires, the blaring of a horn, then what sounded like Megan's phone being dropped. Megan, Andrea called into her headset. Megan, can you hear me? Distant voices could be heard through the phone, but not Megan's. Male voices, their words indistinct, but tone menacing. Then the sound of a vehicle door slamming, an engine revving, and silence. The responding units found Megan's Toyota Corolla crashed into a drainage ditch, driver's door open, no sign of the young woman or the pickup truck that had run her off the road. Despite an immediate search and roadblocks established throughout the county, Neither Megan nor her attackers were located that night. At the end of her shift, Andrea sat in her car in the parking lot, too wired to drive home immediately, despite her exhaustion. Two similar attacks in one night, separated by just hours and miles, couldn't be coincidence. The man in custody for the first incident, identified as 37-year-old Ryan Decker, a local with prior arrests for assault, was still being questioned, but initially denied any knowledge of other participants. As Andrea finally prepared to leave, her supervisor called her back inside. State police had made a disturbing discovery: an anonymous post on a local message board from earlier that evening, detailing a game involving targeting lone female drivers on rural roads. The post included specific routes and instructions for how to force vehicles off the road in areas with limited cell reception. The post had been made at 11:23 p.m., before Andrea's shift had even begun, before the first attack on Lisa Whitaker. The investigation that followed revealed something more disturbing than a simple assault or attempted abduction. The message board where the initial post appeared catered to a network of predators who shared tactics and locations for targeting vulnerable victims. The night drive game had been planned for weeks, with participants selecting stretches of road based on isolation factors and emergency response times. Lisa Whitaker had escaped by pure chance. Her attacker had been less experienced than others in the network, and she'd managed to flee into dense woods where he couldn't follow in his vehicle. Megan Collins wasn't as fortunate. Her body was found 3 days later in an abandoned barn 20 miles from where her car had been recovered. Digital forensics eventually identified 5 participants in the game that night, operating on 3 different rural routes across the county. 2 additional women had been targeted, but had managed to reach populated areas before their pursuers could force them off the road. These women hadn't reported the incidents, not realizing they had narrowly escaped a coordinated attack rather than a random aggressive driver. For Andrea, the most haunting aspect wasn't just the calculated nature of the attacks, but how the perpetrators had used emergency response limitations against them. They had studied patrol patterns, identified dead zones in cell coverage, and selected roads specifically for their isolation and limited escape routes. The attackers had even monitored police frequencies to time their approaches, knowing exactly how long it would take for help to arrive. Andrea testified at the trials of all 5 men, eventually charged in connection with the night drive attacks. Their message board communications revealed a network spanning multiple states, with similar coordinated attacks planned or executed in at least 7 other counties across the Northeast. The case led to significant changes in how rural law enforcement agencies approached nighttime patrols and emergency response. The Rockland County Sheriff's Department installed automated license plate readers on key rural intersections and implemented new dispatch protocols for reports of aggressive driving in isolated areas. Cell carriers accelerated plans to improve coverage along remote stretches of road. Andrea still works as a dispatcher, though she transferred to day shifts 6 months after that January night. She can't drive on rural roads after dark anymore, not since reading the complete message board transcripts during trial preparation and learning just how meticulously the attacks had been planned. What haunts her most isn't the calls themselves, harrowing as they were, but the realization that while she was sitting in the calm of the dispatch center, thinking the early January night would be quiet and routine, a network of predators was already in motion, positioning themselves on dark county roads, waiting for potential victims. And sometimes, in her darkest thoughts, she wonders about the other dispatchers in other counties, taking calls on other quiet nights from other terrified women who didn't know that the vehicle following them wasn't just a random aggressive driver, but someone who had selected them, tracked them, and was executing a plan shared and refined by others who saw vulnerable travelers as nothing more than targets in a game. The case was documented in a 2021 FBI bulletin on coordinated predatory behavior, highlighting how online forums can facilitate synchronized criminal activity across wide geographic areas. Law enforcement officials now monitor certain message boards and social media platforms for signs of similar games being organized, particularly in rural areas with limited police coverage. For drivers in remote areas, the case underscored a sobering reality. Sometimes the most dangerous thing on a night drive isn't the road conditions or your own fatigue, but the deliberate, calculated malice of someone who has chosen that particular stretch of darkness to become a hunter, knowing exactly how long it will take for help to arrive once the pursuit begins. Tyler Wilson had been driving for 14 hours straight when he first noticed the hitchhiker. It was 2:23 a.m. on June 8, 2017, and Interstate 80 stretched before him like a black ribbon through the Wyoming darkness, his headlights illuminating little beyond the immediate road ahead. The cross-country haul from Sacramento to Chicago was routine for the 36-year-old trucker, a route he'd driven dozens of times in his 8 years with Midwest Freight Lines. The figure appeared in the periphery of his high beams, a man standing just off the shoulder near mile marker 237, thumb extended. What caught Tyler's attention wasn't the act of hitchhiking itself, but the bizarre timing and location. This stretch of I-80 was notoriously desolate, with the nearest town over 40 miles away. Who would be seeking a ride here, in the middle of nowhere, at this hour? Tyler didn't stop. Company policy strictly prohibited picking up hitchhikers, and years on the road had instilled a healthy wariness of strangers. He radioed the sighting to any other truckers in the area, a courtesy among long haulers. "Heads up, there's somebody thumbing at marker 237 eastbound. Looks like a male standing in the dark, kind of a weird spot." A few minutes later, his radio crackled with a response from another driver about 5 miles behind him. "Copy that. I'll keep an eye out." Tyler thought little more of it until, 20 minutes later, the same driver's voice came through the radio again, his tone noticeably uneasy. "Wilson, you still on? About that hitchhiker. I just passed marker 237, and there wasn't anybody there." "Maybe he got a ride," Tyler suggested, though something about the timing felt off. 20 minutes wasn't long, especially on this empty stretch. "Maybe," the other driver replied, unconvinced. "Anyway, thanks for the heads up." Tyler drove on, fighting fatigue as the digital clock on his dashboard ticked toward 3 a.m. He'd been pushing himself to make good time, hoping to reach the Nebraska state line before stopping for his mandatory rest period. At a rest area, he pulled in, shut off the engine, and closed his eyes, asleep almost instantly. He woke with a start 3 hours later. The dashboard clock read 6:17 a.m., and pale dawn light filtered through the windows of his cab. Something had pulled him from sleep. A noise, he thought, though the rest area was quiet now. His radio suddenly came to life. "Repeat. Be advised of pedestrian on I-80 eastbound, near mile marker 237. Exercise caution." Tyler froze. Mile marker 237? The same location where he'd seen the hitchhiker over 3 hours ago? He grabbed the radio. "This is Wilson with Midwest Freight. Did you say marker 237? I passed a hitchhiker there around 2:30 this morning." "Negative," came the reply from what sounded like a state trooper. "We've got reports of an individual walking in the traffic lanes. Highway patrol en route." Curious and now fully awake, Tyler started his truck and pulled back onto the interstate, heading east. As he approached mile marker 237, he slowed slightly, scanning the area where he'd seen the figure hours before. The shoulder was empty, But in the growing light, Tyler noticed something he'd missed in the darkness. Just beyond the guardrail, the land dropped away sharply into a steep ravine. He'd driven this route many times, but had never registered this particular topographical feature, hidden as it was by darkness during his usual night drives. About a quarter-mile past the marker, traffic slowed to a crawl. A Wyoming highway patrol car was parked on the shoulder, lights flashing. As Tyler's truck inched past, he saw two officers standing at the guardrail, looking down into the ravine. One held binoculars, the other spoke into a radio. At the next rest area, he pulled over and checked the local news on his phone. The headline confirmed his suspicions. Body discovered off I-80 near Rawlins. According to the brief article, a passing motorist had spotted what appeared to be human remains in a ravine alongside the interstate. The location was listed as approximately mile marker 237. 3 days later, having completed his delivery and picked up a new load bound for Denver, Tyler found himself in a truck stop outside of Des Moines. While eating dinner at the counter, he overheard two other drivers discussing the incident. They're saying the guy had been down there for at least 2 days before someone spotted him, one said between bites of his burger. Car went off the road about 50 yards from the highway. Wouldn't have been visible from the interstate at all, except that someone happened to pull over right at that spot. Accident? Asked his companion. That's the thing. They don't think so. No skid marks, no damage to the guardrail. Almost like he deliberately drove off somewhere else and ended up in that ravine. Tyler abandoned his meal and approached their table. Sorry to interrupt, but are you talking about the body they found off I-80 in Wyoming, near mile marker 237? The first driver nodded. News said they identified him yesterday. Local guy, been missing for a few days. Why? You know something about it? Tyler hesitated, then shared his experience. The hitchhiker he'd spotted, the radio call hours later, the police at the scene. The two drivers exchanged glances. What time did you say you saw this hitchhiker? The second man asked. Around 2:30 in the morning. And what did he look like? Could you see his face? Tyler frowned, trying to recall details from his brief glimpse. Not really. It was dark, average height, wearing what looked like a jacket or coat. Nothing distinctive that I remember. Standing right at mile marker 237? Yeah, right where they found the body later. Why? The first driver pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward Tyler. This the guy you saw? The screen showed a news article with a photograph. A man in his early 30s, with short dark hair and a neat beard. The caption identified him as Marcus Heller, 34, of Laramie, Wyoming. I couldn't say, Tyler admitted. Like I said, it was too dark to make out details. The driver took his phone back, scrolling further through the article. Well, according to this, they think Heller died sometime Monday night from injuries sustained in the crash. His car went off the road, about a mile from where his body was found. Looks like he survived the initial accident and was trying to reach the highway for help. Monday night. Tyler did the mental calculation. That would have been 2 nights before he'd driven past. 2 nights before he'd seen someone hitchhiking at exactly the spot where the man's body was later discovered. That can't be right, Tyler said, a chill running through him, despite the truck stop's overheated interior. I saw somebody there Wednesday night. If this guy died Monday. The second driver shrugged. Probably just a different hitchhiker. Weird coincidence, that's all. Tyler nodded, wanting to believe the explanation, but something nagged at him. He returned to his table, appetite gone, and opened his own phone to search for more information. What he found deepened his unease. According to multiple news sources, Marcus Heller's vehicle had been discovered in a ravine approximately 1 mile west of where his body was found. The accident appeared to have occurred when he swerved to avoid wildlife on the road. Based on evidence at the scene, investigators believed Heller had survived the crash, but was severely injured. He had apparently attempted to walk along the ravine toward the highway, making it nearly a mile before succumbing to his injuries. The coroner's preliminary report estimated time of death as late Monday night or early Tuesday morning, at least 24 hours before Tyler had seen the figure standing at mile marker 237. Tyler was still processing this information when a notification appeared on his phone. A text from Jordan Keyes, the driver who had been behind him on I-80 that night. "You hear about that body they found where you saw the hitchhiker? News says he'd been dead for days. Weird, right?" Tyler stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Finally, he typed, "Maybe it was a different person?" Jordan's reply came quickly. "Maybe, but I asked around. 2 other drivers reported seeing someone hitchhiking at exactly the same spot Tuesday night. Same description, male, dark clothing, standing right at marker 237. Nobody on Wednesday except you and me." 3 months later, Tyler was assigned another cross-country route via I-80. As he approached the now infamous mile marker 237 in the late afternoon, he noticed something new: a small white cross planted just beyond the guardrail, marking the spot where Marcus Heller had been found. As Tyler drove past, a movement caught his eye. A figure stood beside the cross, a man in dark clothing, facing the highway. Tyler blinked, and the figure was gone. He kept driving, hands tight on the wheel. Whatever he had or hadn't seen, he wouldn't be stopping at mile marker 237. Not now, not ever. The incidents at mile marker 237 were eventually documented in a 2019 article in Wyoming Highways magazine, which explored the unusual number of single-vehicle accidents in the area. Highway safety experts identified several factors that made this stretch particularly dangerous: a slight curve in the road, deceptive grading that could cause drivers to misjudge their speed, and the lack of lights or reflective markers. In response, the Department of Transportation installed additional safety features, including enhanced reflectors, rumble strips, and extended guardrails. They also placed a large dangerous curve ahead sign 1 mile before the area. The article made brief mention of the hitchhiker sightings, attributing them to driver fatigue and the psychological impact of knowing others have died in the area, essentially dismissing them as a form of modern folklore. For Tyler Wilson and other drivers who had seen the figure at mile marker 237, the explanation felt insufficient. They had seen something, or someone, standing where no living person had reason to be, always at night, always at the exact spot where tragedy had occurred or would soon unfold. Tyler still drives the I-80 corridor regularly, but he no longer does so at night if he can avoid it. When other truckers ask why, he simply says he prefers the daytime views. He doesn't tell them about the hitchhiker, or how he still sometimes sees a figure standing beside the white cross in his peripheral vision as he passes mile marker 237. A figure that vanishes when directly observed, but leaves behind the unsettling certainty that on this stretch of lonely highway, the line between the living and the dead might be as thin as the white paint marking the road's edge. Rachel Donovan glanced at the fuel gauge and frowned. The needle hovered just above empty, a warning she'd been ignoring for the past 20 miles. It was 11:42 p.m. on April 17, 2022, and the stretch of highway between Memphis and Nashville had proven longer and more desolate than she'd anticipated when planning this solo road trip. The 29-year-old graphic designer had spent the weekend at a friend's wedding in Memphis and was now racing back to Nashville for an important client meeting Monday morning. Her GPS estimated another hour and 40 minutes to her apartment, but her Toyota Corolla wouldn't make it without fuel. Rachel squinted at a passing highway sign. Next services, exit 118, 12 miles. She did a quick mental calculation. 12 miles at current speed meant about 10 minutes. Her car could manage that, even on fumes. The stretch of I-40 she was traveling was particularly dark, with dense forest pressing close on both sides and few other vehicles sharing the road at this hour. Her headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, the yellow lines of the highway hypnotic in their consistency. When exit 118 finally appeared, Rachel signaled and eased onto the off-ramp. The exit led to a 2-lane country road with no immediate signs of civilization. Her GPS recalculated, directing her to continue straight for 2.3 miles to reach a gas station. The road was narrower than she'd expected, poorly lit and winding through thick woods. Houses were few and far between, most set back from the road and dark at this hour. Rachel's unease grew as the miles ticked by, with no sign of the promised gas station. At 2.1 miles, she rounded a bend and felt a surge of relief. Ahead stood a small gas station, its fluorescent lights creating a pool of harsh brightness in the surrounding darkness. The sign simply read, "Fuel," in faded red letters. No brand name, no convenience store logo, just a utilitarian announcement of its purpose. Rachel pulled up to one of the 4 pumps, noticing she was the only customer. A single pickup truck was parked next to what appeared to be the station's office, presumably belonging to the attendant. The place had a distinctly dated feel, with analog pumps rather than the digital ones she was accustomed to in Nashville. She stepped out of her car, the night air cooler than expected. The station was eerily quiet. No music playing over outdoor speakers, no distant traffic sounds, just the buzz of the fluorescent lights and the chirping of insects from the surrounding woods. Rachel inserted her credit card into the pump's reader, but nothing happened. She tried again, then noticed a handwritten sign taped to the pump. Card reader broken. Pay inside. Sighing, she glanced toward the office. Through the windows, she could see a counter and the silhouette of someone sitting behind it. Rachel locked her car and walked toward the building. The office door had a bell that jingled as she entered. Behind the counter sat a man in his 60s, reed thin with deeply lined features and a patchy gray beard. He looked up from a dog-eared paperback, regarding her with an expression that wasn't quite a smile. "Evening," he said, his voice raspy. "What can I do for you?" "Hi, pump 3, please," Rachel replied, reaching for her wallet. "The card reader outside isn't working." "None of them work," the man said. "Been waiting on the company to send someone out to fix them for 3 months now." He chuckled, though there was little humor in the sound. "How much you need?" "Just fill it up, please. I'll be back after I pump." Rachel hesitated, then asked, "Is there a restroom I could use?" The man jerked his thumb toward a door at the back of the office. "Through there. Lights on a timer, so you'll need to pull the cord." The bathroom was as basic as the rest of the station. A single toilet, a sink with a cracked mirror above it, and walls of dingy tile. As she washed her hands, she heard the office door's bell jingle. Another customer, she assumed, though she hadn't heard a car pull up. When Rachel emerged from the bathroom, the office was empty except for the attendant, who was back to reading his paperback. "Did someone else come in?" she asked, glancing around. The man looked up, his expression unreadable. "Nope, just you and me." Rachel was certain she'd heard the bell ring, but decided it wasn't worth pursuing. "I'll go pump my gas now." Outside, the night seemed to have grown darker and colder during her brief time indoors. Rachel hurried to pump 3 and began filling her tank, keeping her back to the forest that pressed close to the station's perimeter. Something about the dense line of trees made her uneasy, as though the darkness beneath them was watching. The pump clicked off at $43.27. Rachel returned to the office to pay, finding the attendant in exactly the same position, as though he hadn't moved at all during her absence. "That'll be $43.27, he confirmed, as she handed over 2 20s and a 10. As he made change, he asked, "Where are you headed?" "Nashville," Rachel replied, eager to be back on the road. The man nodded slowly. "You'll want to go back the way you came, then right at the fork to get back to the interstate." He slid her change across the counter. "Might be best to hurry along. These roads can get tricky at night. Easy to take a wrong turn." Something in his tone made Rachel's skin prickle. Was it a warning or a threat? His face remained impassive, giving nothing away. "Thanks for the advice," she said, pocketing her change. "Have a good night." The bell jingled as Rachel pushed through the door, returning to the bubble of light created by the gas station's fluorescence. She hurried to her car, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. As she opened her driver's side door, she glanced back at the office. The attendant stood at the window, staring directly at her, his features shadowed. Rachel got in her car quickly, locked the doors, and started the engine. As she pulled away from the pump, her headlights swept across the tree line at the edge of the property. For a split second, she thought she saw movement among the trees, a darker shadow shifting against the backdrop of forest. She accelerated, turning onto the road and following the attendant's directions toward the highway. The fork he'd mentioned appeared after about a mile. Rachel took the right turn, noticing how the road immediately narrowed, the pavement becoming rougher. Her car jostled over potholes as the woods pressed in closer on both sides. After 5 minutes of driving, Rachel began to worry. Shouldn't she have reached the highway by now? The road continued to wind through unbroken forest, with no signs or landmarks visible. She checked her odometer. She'd gone nearly 4 miles since leaving the gas station, well past where the interstate should have been. Rachel slowed, considering whether to turn around. That's when her headlights illuminated a reflective sign ahead. I-40 East, 2 miles. Relief washed over her. She was on the right track after all. The road began to climb, curving around the shoulder of a wooded hill. As Rachel rounded a particularly sharp bend, her headlights caught something that made her slam on the brakes. A figure standing at the edge of the road, arm extended in the universal hitchhiker's gesture. Her car skidded slightly on the rough pavement before coming to a stop about 20 feet from the figure. A man in dark clothing, his features indistinct in the shadows beyond her headlights' reach. He remained motionless, arms still raised. Without hesitation, she accelerated around the figure, careful to maintain as much distance as possible as she passed. In her rearview mirror, she saw him pivot slowly to watch her car disappear around the next bend. He made no attempt to pursue, just stood watching, somehow making his stillness more unnerving than any aggression would have been. The road continued to wind uphill for another mile before finally cresting and beginning a descent. Rachel's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. The highway had to be close now. The sign had said 2 miles. As she rounded yet another curve, her headlights reflected off something metal ahead. A gate stretched across the road, blocking further progress. Rachel slowed to a stop, confusion giving way to alarm. The gate looked old but sturdy, secured with a heavy chain and padlock. Beyond it, the road continued, but was visibly overgrown, with weeds pushing through cracks in the pavement. This couldn't be right. There shouldn't be a gate blocking a public road, especially one supposedly leading to an interstate highway. Rachel put her car in reverse, preparing to turn around, when her headlights dimmed momentarily, then brightened again. The engine sputtered once, twice, then smoothed out. She executed a careful three-point turn and began driving back the way she'd come, her speed higher than was safe on the unfamiliar potholed pavement. She approached the area where she'd seen the hitchhiker with dread, but the spot was empty when she passed it. Rachel continued downhill, eyes constantly checking her mirrors, watching the tree line on either side of the road, aware of how exposed she was in her illuminated vehicle against the backdrop of complete darkness. When she reached the fork, Rachel took the left turn this time, the direction she'd originally come from. This road seemed better maintained, and within minutes, she spotted a green reflective sign that made her exhale with relief. I-40 entrance, 1 mile. True to the sign's promise, the interstate appeared exactly 1 mile later. Rachel merged onto I-40, finally feeling safe as she accelerated to highway speed, other vehicles visible in the distance. Her GPS signal returned, confirming she was back on the correct route to Nashville. The next day, curious about her unsettling experience, Rachel researched exit 118 on I-40. What she discovered sent chills down her spine. According to state transportation maps, exit 118 had been permanently closed 3 years earlier due to structural issues with the overpass. The exit no longer existed, yet she had taken it. She had found a gas station. She had encountered an attendant who sent her down a road leading nowhere. Rachel never took that stretch of I-40 again, always routing her trips through alternate highways, despite the additional driving time. She filled her tank religiously, never letting it drop below half, and kept a 5-gallon container of emergency fuel in her trunk. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, she would find herself thinking about the gas station attendant's final words to her. These roads can get tricky at night, easy to take a wrong turn. Had it been a warning after all? And what might have happened if she'd continued past that chained gate? Or if she'd stopped for the hitchhiker on the dark, winding road? Some questions, Rachel decided, were better left unanswered. Some exits were never meant to be taken, especially on lonely highways in the dead of night. Michael Sawyer didn't consider himself anxious. At 42, he had traveled extensively for work as a software consultant, navigating unfamiliar highways with ease. But as darkness fell on September 8, 2021, while driving through rural eastern Montana, unease settled in his stomach. He'd left Billings that afternoon, heading toward Bismarck, North Dakota, for a client meeting. Road construction forced him onto a detour along secondary highways. Night had fallen quickly, the vast Montana sky transitioning from sunset to absolute darkness in minutes. Michael's rented Ford Explorer crawled along Highway 200, cutting through expanses of ranch land and wheat fields. The first warning sign was subtle. His Explorer's headlights dimmed momentarily, then brightened again. Michael frowned. The vehicle was nearly new, with just over 3,000 miles. There shouldn't be issues. 10 minutes later, it happened again. This time, the dashboard lights flickered too. Michael reduced his speed, suddenly aware of how utterly dark the landscape was, beyond his vehicle's illuminated bubble. Without headlights, visibility would be zero. Michael reached for his phone to check for nearby service stations, but found the screen dark. The battery had been at 87% less than an hour ago. Perfect, he muttered. He'd have to rely on road signs, assuming he could find any in this remote stretch. The Explorer shuddered, the engine's hum interrupted by a stutter. Dashboard lights flickered more persistently, the speedometer bouncing erratically. Warning lights bloomed across the dashboard. Battery, check engine, ABS. The radio went silent. Michael strained to see anything beyond his faltering headlights. A farmhouse, a service station, any sign of human presence. The landscape remained stubbornly dark. With a final sputter, the Explorer's engine died. The headlights dimmed to a sickly yellow, then extinguished. Momentum carried the vehicle forward before it rolled to a stop on the shoulder. Silence was immediate and absolute. Michael turned the key repeatedly. Each attempt met with silence. Not even a click from the starter. Using a small flashlight from the glove compartment, Michael stepped out. The night air hit him like a physical presence, cool and still. He swept the beam across the vehicle but found nothing wrong. The engine compartment appeared normal to his untrained eye. Michael did a 360-degree turn with his flashlight. The road stretched empty in both directions, disappearing into blackness. No headlights approached. No lights twinkled on the horizon to suggest a farm. Only wind whispered through roadside grasses. He checked his watch. 9:37 p.m. Hours until dawn, with no guarantee traffic would be heavier in daylight. His best option was to wait and hope someone passed by. Back in the Explorer, Michael gathered what he might need: a jacket for a pillow, water, and a protein bar. As he settled in, he realized how vulnerable he was. His flashlight had grown dimmer in just minutes of use. Michael switched it off, plunging the vehicle into complete darkness. He waited for his eyes to adjust, but the darkness remained absolute. An hour passed without another vehicle. Michael alternated between dozing and jolting awake at imagined sounds. During one waking moment, he detected a faint glow on the western horizon. Headlights, perhaps? He watched as the glow steadily brightened, but something wasn't right. The light was too diffuse to be headlights, spreading across too wide an area, and it moved too slowly. Michael stepped out again, watching with growing concern. The approaching illumination resembled the ambient glow of a distant town, but he knew there were no settlements in that direction for at least 50 miles. As the light approached, landscape features emerged from darkness. Fence posts along the highway, rolling prairie, abandoned farm buildings about a quarter-mile away. The glow had an unnatural quality, tinting everything orange-yellow. Then he saw its source. Cresting a gentle rise about a mile back, a wall of flame stretched across the horizon. A prairie fire moving steadily eastward, driven by strengthening winds. The scale was difficult to comprehend. A literal wall of fire advancing across the landscape. Even at this distance, he could hear its deep, continuous roar, punctuated by sharp cracks, as structures succumbed to flames. Michael scrambled back into the Explorer, frantically trying the ignition again. Nothing. Through the windshield, he watched the approaching fire. Flames reached 30 feet into the air, generating a towering smoke cloud, visible only where it blotted out stars. He grabbed his travel bag and abandoned the vehicle, sprinting toward the abandoned farm buildings. They were dilapidated. A house with collapsed roof sections, a listing barn, and a root cellar dug into a small rise. The cellar might offer protection if the fire reached this far. At the root cellar, one wooden door hung partially open, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. The cellar was surprisingly intact: stone walls, wooden shelves, and a packed earth floor. Behind him, the fire's roar grew louder. Michael glanced back to see flames engulfing where his Explorer had been parked. Heat was palpable even at this distance, the air growing thick with smoke. He descended into the cellar, pulling the door closed. The small space had a low ceiling that required stooping. Through gaps in the aging wood, flickering light penetrated as fire approached. Temperature rose steadily, and smoke seeped through door seams, forcing Michael to breathe through his jacket sleeve. For nearly 2 hours, Michael huddled in the root cellar as wildfire raged overhead. Heat became nearly unbearable, the air so smoke-filled that breathing was painful. His flashlight died, leaving darkness broken only by fire glow through door cracks. Gradually, the roaring diminished. Temperature began falling, though air remained acrid with smoke. By the time Michael cautiously pushed open the cellar door, dawn was breaking over a transformed landscape. The farmhouse and barn were gone, reduced to smoldering foundations. Prairie grass had burned away, revealing blackened earth, punctuated by skeletal remains of fence posts. His Explorer was a scorched hulk, metal warped and tires burned to rims. In strengthening daylight, Michael could see the fire had burned everything westward, but spared the area east of the abandoned farm. Some quirk of terrain had diverted the main force northward, just past his position. He began walking east along the highway, through a surreal landscape divided between devastation and untouched prairie. After 3 miles, he encountered emergency vehicles, establishing a perimeter at the fire's eastern edge. Authorities were stunned to find him alive. The wildfire, sparked by lightning and driven by unusually strong winds, had consumed over 40,000 acres in less than 6 hours. Highway 200 had been closed well east of where Michael's GPS had directed him, a closure his device would have alerted him to had he been within cell service range. The electrical failure of his rental vehicle was later attributed to a manufacturing defect, a recall notice issued the very day Michael was driving through Montana. The timing of the failure, coinciding with his detour into the path of an advancing wildfire without cell service, created what investigators described as a perfect storm of cascading risk factors. Michael never drove through Montana again. He now travels with an extensive emergency kit, including a hand crank radio, power banks, emergency blankets, and a respirator. What haunts him isn't memories of flames or hours spent in that root cellar. It's the realization of how quickly the veneer of safety provided by modern technology can be stripped away, leaving one alone in darkness with nothing but instinct and luck.